In this video, I'm asking, do Blackpool Pleasure Beach have too many old rides? Hello, I'm Scott and you're watching Your Experience Guide, and this video is all about Blackpool Pleasure Beach and do they have too many old rides? Now of course Blackpool Pleasure Beach is steeped in history. The park opened in 1896, over 125 years of Blackpool Pleasure Beach already, and more than that of course, because in 2021 it was the 125th year anniversary. And still to this day, you've got rides that were built in the early 1900s at Blackpool Pleasure Beach. Rides like the Flying Machines and the River Caves. As well as those attractions, you've got things like the Big Dipper that opened in the 1920s, Roller Coaster, now known as Nickelodeon Streak, and the Grand National, they opened in the 1930s. So there is a lot of historic and old attractions at Blackpool Pleasure Beach. And quite often we see comments, whether it be on our Facebook page or on YouTube, saying Blackpool Pleasure Beach has too many old rides now, the price is too high for a place that has all these old rides, the park needs to move on, the park needs to get new rides, and we see a lot of that. So that's why I'm making this video today, because I don't believe there's a right or wrong, or a definitive right or wrong answer to do Blackpool Pleasure Beach have too many old rides, because it really does depend on what every single person going to Blackpool Pleasure Beach wants. So please, let me know in the comments section what you think as you're watching through this video. Do Blackpool Pleasure Beach have too many old rides? I'm really interested to see what everyone thinks about this. So in this video, I'm actually going to look at both sides of this argument in terms of, yes, there is too many old rides at Blackpool Pleasure Beach, and no, absolutely not. There isn't too many old rides at Blackpool Pleasure Beach. So I'm going to start with the yes, there is too many old rides at Blackpool Pleasure Beach side of the argument. And I think we have to come to the public perception of the rides at Blackpool Pleasure Beach. With the exception of Valhalla and Icon, whenever we post a video up of Blackpool Pleasure Beach, especially on Facebook, because we've been doing that a lot over the last 3 or 4 months, we've been also uploading like POVs from Blackpool Pleasure Beach onto our Facebook page as well. And there's always somebody quick to comment how one of the wooden coasters doesn't have enough restraints or seat belts or whatever, and they'll have a story about how they nearly got thrown out, how someone had to catch them. They'll have a big tale about some big airtime problem because they don't understand what airtime is, and they'll be explaining a big story, and it's usually an exaggerated story, which if they were telling the truth, they wouldn't be online to be telling that tale. But there's always one of those exaggerated stories posted whenever we post about any of the older rides at Blackpool Pleasure Beach. I was going to pick some rides, but to be honest, it's most of them other than Valhalla and Icon. But it's always the wooden coasters that have these exaggerated stories. It's normally, I got thrown out of my seat, I got whiplash, I got an injury, it's a bone smasher. And unfortunately, no matter how much fans of Blackpool Pleasure Beach, like myself and many others on social media, will try and stick up for Blackpool Pleasure Beach in these situations and be like, you didn't get thrown out of the train. Can you prove you got this injury, or whatever the response might be? There will always be an exaggerated story of how someone got thrown out of a train or an injury or something. And I'm certain that's why we now see things like the disclaimer boards outside the Grand National and Big Dipper, because you see so many of these exaggerated stories on social media. So you might be thinking, why does that make the rides at Blackpool Pleasure Beach too old? Or why could they be viewed as too old because of these opinions? Well, basically because they're old rides and because of the restraint systems they have, which have been successful restraint systems for a very long time, they're an easy target because they're old rides. And that's a shame, because these rides have given people over many different generations a lot of fun, a lot of enjoyment, and kept people coming back to Blackpool Pleasure Beach time and time again. I think it's great that I've been able to go on the Big Dipper with my dad, who will have been on it with his parents, and they'll have been on it with their parents, and eventually I will be able to go on the Big Dipper with my son as well, and it just keeps passing down from generation to generation to generation. But unfortunately, with comments about these rides being bone smashers, giving people whiplash, or throwing people out, which, yeah, all right, some people might get injured off airtime. It can happen. They are old rides, they are a bit brutal. But the exaggerated stories on social media will always lead to a ride's popularity being so bad that it will get removed. A prime example here is the Wild Mouse at Blackpool Pleasure Beach, removed at the start of 2018. Now, I'm sure we all have a good story about the Wild Mouse and how brutal it was, but unfortunately, it was the ride for people to complain about. So I think we really have to be mindful of the fact that when we're seeing comments about rides giving people whiplash, throwing them out, causing injuries and all that, it will eventually lead to these rides having insurance costs that are so high and new safety measures that are so extreme that parks will just go, we might as well get rid of it. And that's basically what's happened with the Wild Mouse. And it could happen with rides like the Grand National, Big Dipper, Nickelodeon Street, all rides that come under a lot of criticism for doing basically what they've always done. So sticking on the side of why the argument of Blackpool Pleasure Beach's rides are too old, another one is that people always want to see something new in a theme park or amusement park or at a fun fair. We all like to see new rides, and sometimes that has to be at the expense of a ride that is already there. That's why parks like Alton Towers have been a lot more popular than Blackpool Pleasure Beach over the last 20 years, because Alton Towers have continued to invest in their ride lineup, bringing new exciting projects to the park. Those rides and roller coasters that have been added to the park over the last 20-25 years, in my opinion, are not all that good. I mean, there's some stuff that's really good and some stuff that's really quite average, but because it's new, because there was a good marketing campaign, because it's something different, they are popular attractions that will draw people in to Alton Towers. Whereas if you've basically got the same lineup for 20-30 years and are only adding 1 or 2 new roller coasters every 10 years, people are going to look to go elsewhere because they are going to get bored of doing the same thing over and over again. And like I say, it's nice to go on a roller coaster that your parents went on, your grandparents, your great-grandparents went on, but also it's nice to see new stuff alongside those classic attractions. And one more reason for why you would maybe be on the side of the fence that says, yes, there is too many old rides at Blackpool Pleasure Beach, is just look at where we are now in terms of how many rides are potentially reaching the end of their service life at Blackpool Pleasure Beach. We've got Ice Blast, which is not opened yet for the 2024 season. It doesn't look like opening. There's still rumours that it's never going to reopen. Of course, we had the infamous tweet on opening day where it was stated that Ice Blast or PlayStation will reopen, but as a guest who's visited Blackpool Pleasure Beach 3 times this year, I've seen nothing different from the close season to say, yeah, Ice Blast is going to open soon. Now, at the time of recording, that could change very quickly, but that's an example of a ride that maybe has been left to get too old and has got to the point where it just can't operate anymore without a lot of money spending on it. And another example is River Caves. River Caves actually opened on opening weekend at Blackpool Pleasure Beach, but a couple of weeks into the season, and it's been closed ever since for planned maintenance. Now, of course, if there was planned maintenance, you would imagine that it would have been done in the closed season. So, of course, when it did open, obviously there's been an issue that's been found with it, and now it's been closed indefinitely with currently, at the time of filming, no sort of date set out on the website by Blackpool Pleasure Beach for when the River Caves will reopen. And if you were to look at the River Caves currently from the exterior, you would think, yeah, that ride's gone for good. It's never going to reopen. Because, of course, we can't see what's going on inside the actual building where the ride is. But for anyone that's looking at it from an exterior point of view, you'd just be like, yeah, that's gone. That's never coming back. Because that's how it looks. And to be fair, it looks the same with Ice Blast as well. And then, of course, there's the Grand Prix, which is closed permanently or standing but not operating as it's currently listed. It's well documented that that ride is going to be removed and Blackpool Pleasure Beach are going to replace it. But how many more of these old rides are they going to have to replace in the next couple of years? because you've got things like the Revolution, which on opening weekend had a lot of rollbacks, a lot of evacuations. On our last visit to Blackpool Pleasure Beach 2 weeks ago, it was evacuated in the first hour. We've been up there a few times when it's broke down, and structurally, we've got to be honest, it's not looking great. It's one of those attractions where I really wouldn't be surprised if it gets removed in the next couple of years. And then we move on to Avalanche, another ride that's been heavily linked to closure or removal over the next couple of years. To look at it, does it look like it's going to last for another 10 years? It's hard to say, but it just seems like another one that might be on the chopping block. It's worth remembering that in 2023, Avalanche ran for a lot of the season on one train, and the rumours were that the second and third and fourth trains that it had were simply just not serviceable, so they were using those for parts to keep the one train going. How true that was, nobody really knows other than Pleasure Beach, but it did run on one train for a long time. It did eventually go onto two trains for the main summer season, but for a lot of last season, Avalanche was on a one train service, which kind of points to the rumours about it being towards the end of service life. They might be right. And then of course we've got the big one. It needs retracking work every winter to keep it open. It's had quite a lot of issues at the start of the season. I know I've recently done a video about the big one and what's wrong with the big one and does it have as much downtime as everyone says. I'll let you watch that one if you haven't already. I'll link it whichever side it is in the top of the screen. But there's no doubt about it, it's not a great start to the season. That might be because there's just a few issues that they need to iron out, or it might be because that is reaching the end of service life. I very much doubt Pleasure Beach will remove the big one. I think they will keep investing in it. But all of the other rides I've mentioned, they could quite easily get shut off. Especially like Ice Blast, Avalanche, Revolution. They're all easy to replace. River Caves, not so easy to replace because it's interlocked with Wallace and Gromit and the Ghost Train. But the other three, they could definitely be removed and replaced quite easily. So why would all that come under the yes, Blackpool Pleasure Beach have too many rides that are too old? Well, it would be a problem for any theme park or amusement park in the world if you have got 4 or 5 rides all reaching the end of their service life around the same time scale. Now, is that because of money that hasn't been spent on them in the years before, or is it simply just a case of these rides are just reaching the end of their service life? On the flip side of it all, there is definitely an argument that Blackpool Pleasure Beach doesn't have too many old rides, because a lot of the rides that they do have are still really good attractions, really enjoyable, and people who go to Blackpool Pleasure Beach do enjoy those attractions. Now, whether that's just enthusiast nostalgia or not, I don't really know, but there is definitely a market there still for the kind of rides that Blackpool Pleasure Beach has. In my opinion, Blackpool Pleasure Beach is still an amusement park. They are advertising themselves as Pleasure Beach Resort, as a theme park. In my opinion, they're not a theme park. They don't have themed areas. They don't have many themed rides. They don't have much themed music. They are very much a classic amusement park with classic attractions. And I think that's okay. But I do still think that the park probably does need to modernise alongside keeping some of the attractions that they currently have. I don't think every classic ride needs to be saved. And some of the rides that I've mentioned, Ice Blast, Avalanche, Revolution, Grand Prix, I'd really not be disappointed to see those attractions replaced with modern attractions that will bring in the next generation of thrill seekers to Blackpool Pleasure Beach, alongside those like myself and others who have got great memories of Blackpool Pleasure Beach and still want to go on things like the Big Dipper, the Grand National, the River Caves, the Ghost Train, the big one. But not every classic ride can be saved, but plenty of them should be saved to run alongside modern attractions, replacing those that have simply come to the end of their service life. In my opinion, it's a lot easier to save rides like the Grand National, Big Dipper, Nickelodeon Street compared to things like Avalanche, Steeplechase and Ice Blast. With things like the Big Dipper and the Grand National and Nickelodeon Street, they've been modernised over time since the 20s, since the 30s, where they've had retracks, had new trains, had slight reprofiles. And there's no reason why those rides can't get another lease of life with companies like the Gravity Group and Great Coasters International out there who could come in and work with Blackpool Pleasure Beach to perhaps modernise the wooden coasters, give them some different profiling, change the layout slightly without taking them too far away from what made those rides popular in the first place. So to conclude, do Blackpool Pleasure Beach have too many old rides? Well, I'm still on the fence. I still think it's a yes and no answer. Yes, there is a lot of rides that you could remove and replace with modern stuff that would draw in the crowds to Blackpool Pleasure Beach that the park so desperately needs. But on the other side of it, there is a lot of rides at Blackpool Pleasure Beach that should never be removed, in my opinion, and should be maybe modernised to keep them running, keep them good, keep them interesting to people without changing them too much. As an example again, River Caves, currently closed. Is it worth keeping it closed all season and reimagining it, getting it ready for 2025 with lots of new scenes, new boats and a new water system, if that's what it needs? Well, why not? As long as there's communication to tell people, people might go, oh, well, why weren't you doing this in the closed season? Which I think we'd all say. But at the same time, if Pleasure Beach said, well, actually, we're going to completely reimagine it and give it all new scenes, modernise it, keep it similar to what it is now, but with modern scenes and new boats with backrests, I think we'd all go, actually, that's not such a bad idea. So yeah, it's very much a yes and no answer, which is why I'd love to see what you think about it in the comments section below. So please write into us in the comments, let us know what you think. Do Blackpool Pleasure Beach have too many old rides, or have they got just enough? Please let me know in the comments section below. If you have enjoyed this video, please hit the like button. It's a little thumbs up below. Please subscribe. Many thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.